The night was quiet in the foothills. A silver wash of moonlight draped itself across the pine trees, and the air was still except for the chirp of a lone cricket. My cabin sat at the edge of the HOA community, close enough to see the neat lawns and decorative mailboxes, but far enough that the mountains whispered louder than my neighbors ever could. I had chosen this place for peace. After 20 years serving as a U.S. Marshal, tracking fugitives across backroads, escorting high-risk prisoners, and staring down the barrel of too many cheap pistols, I wanted quiet. My Chevy Silverado sat parked in the gravel driveway, still dusted with mud from a fishing trip. To me, it wasn't just a truck, it was a companion. That Chevy had carried me through rain, snow, and a dozen high-speed chases across state lines. But to Karen, the HOA president, it was an eyesore. Karen believed every inch of this mountain community should look like the glossy pages of a real estate brochure. Perfect hedges, spotless cars, shutters painted in HOA-approved colors. My Chevy, with its lifted suspension, grille guard, and mud-splattered doors, broke every silent rule she worshipped. I had shrugged her off for months. Her warning letters slid under my door, her snide comments at the community gate. "You know," she said once, holding her little clipboard, "your vehicle lowers the property value of this entire lane." I just smiled. "Lady, if you knew the people I've chased in this truck, you'd thank it instead of whining." But Karen wasn't the type to let go. That night at exactly 12:47 a.m., I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I slid out of bed and pulled back the curtain. 3 black and white SUVs rolled slowly into my driveway, their light bars dark but their spotlights on. The word police was stenciled on the sides, but something about them was wrong. Too clean, too staged. 2 men stepped out first. Uniforms, badges, belts heavy with gear, but their posture was sloppy. Their holsters sat wrong on their hips, their boots shined too much. I had spent 2 decades around law enforcement. I could smell counterfeit authority before they even spoke. I slipped on jeans and a black t-shirt, then reached for the badge and ID wallet sitting on my nightstand. Old habits die hard. A Marshal never sleeps too far from his credentials or his Glock. The knock rattled the wooden door, 3 sharp pounds. "Police," a voice called. "Open up." I took my time, flicked on the porch light, let its yellow glow spill across the driveway. The 3 SUVs gleamed too bright, as if they'd been painted yesterday. Another man climbed out of the back, scanning the yard with a maglite. He wasn't checking perimeters like an officer would. He was stalling, waiting. When I opened the door, I kept my shoulders square, my badge wallet hidden in my palm. "What's the problem, officer?" I asked. The lead man was tall, maybe mid-30s, with a buzz cut that tried too hard. His badge caught the porch light, but it was generic, the kind you could buy at a surplus shop. "We've had complaints about your vehicle, sir," he said. "This truck is reported stolen property. We're going to impound it immediately." My eyes flicked past him. 2 men were already circling the Chevy, one with a toe slip in his hand. Sloppy, too sloppy. A real cop would have called in VIN verification at minimum. "Stolen property?" I let the words roll slow, as if I were just a sleepy homeowner, not a federal officer trained to peel lies apart. "That's funny. I've had that Chevy for 12 years. Title's in my safe. Want me to fetch it?" Buzzcut narrowed his eyes. "Sir, we don't need your title. Step aside. We'll handle this." That's when I knew these weren't cops. They weren't even good pretenders. They were hired muscle, probably by Karen. She had finally escalated her war over property values into something criminal. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Mind if I see that badge up close?" He stiffened. "Sir, step aside." I flipped my wallet open, quick and precise, letting the silver star catch the light. United States Marshal. My ID photo stared back at him. "You first," I said calmly. The silence that followed was heavy. The man's jaw twitched. Behind him, the 2 others froze mid-step near the Chevy, as if the badge had turned the gravel beneath their boots into quicksand. "I'll save you some trouble," I continued, my voice low, steady. "That truck isn't stolen, and you aren't police, which means right now you're impersonating law enforcement in front of a federal officer. You understand how long that can put you behind bars." The maglite man cursed under his breath. Buzzcut tried to recover. We were just hired for repossession. That's all misunderstanding." I stepped forward close enough that he saw the steel in my eyes. "Repossession at midnight with fake badges and unmarked paperwork. That's not a misunderstanding. That's conspiracy." One of the men near the Chevy suddenly blurted, "Look, it was the HOA lady. She paid us cash, said the truck was illegal here. We didn't know." "Shut up," Buzzcut snapped, but the damage was done. Corinne's fingerprints were all over this. I held up a hand. Keys, wallets, phones, put them on the hood of my truck now. Buzzcut hesitated. My Glock was still holstered, but the weight of my voice carried more threat than steel. One by one, they obeyed, tossing their gear on the Chevy's hood. When I pulled out my phone to dial the sheriff's office, Buzzcut panicked. He lunged forward, hand going for my arm. Wrong move. Years of training kicked in. I twisted his wrist, flipped him hard onto the porch boards, and planted a knee between his shoulders before he could suck in a breath. The others froze, hands half raised. "You just added assault on a federal officer to your resume," I muttered. By the time the deputies arrived, the three fakes were lined up against the fence, hands zip-tied behind their backs with flex cuffs I kept in a tool drawer. The sheriff himself, a stout man named Havorson, gave me a long look as I explained. "Marshal, you telling me HOA Corinne sent these yahoos?" he asked, half in disbelief. I nodded toward the men. One of them already confessed. She hired them to tow my truck under the cover of fake authority. Havorson shook his head. "I've had run-ins with her before, petty stuff, but this is new." As his deputies hauled the imposters into the SUVs, I caught the look in Corinne's eyes from across the street. She had come out in her robe, clutching her little clipboard even at midnight, her face pale in the porch light. Our eyes met, and for the first time, she didn't look smug. She looked cornered. She knew the game had changed. But so did I. This wasn't about a truck anymore. This was about power. Corinne had pulled something criminal, and if I knew her type, she wouldn't back down after one failed stunt. She would escalate. And I'd be ready. Because she still didn't understand who she was dealing with. I wasn't just a neighbor. I wasn't just a truck owner. I was a U.S. Marshal. And in my world, people like her never walk away clean. The morning after the fake cops incident, the mountain air felt sharper than usual. I brewed my coffee black and sat on the porch, watching the mist rise from the lake. For a few precious minutes, I pretended it was just another morning, quiet, simple, unbroken. But the Chevy parked in my driveway was a reminder. Its hood still bore faint smudges from where those imposters had dropped their fake badges and phones. The sheriff had promised to dig into their story. He'd taken my statement, assured me charges were pending. But I'd been in law enforcement long enough to know what that meant. Paperwork, weeks of delay, half-hearted DA work unless I kept pushing. And Corinne would spend those weeks plotting her next move. I didn't have to wait long. By 10 a.m., a folded sheet of paper was taped to my front door. HOA letterhead, official language. Notice of community violaciones. Unauthorized vehicle parked in driveway, section 4.2. Excessive noise complaints, section 3.1. Failure to maintain lawn aesthetics, section 2.7. Deadline, 72 hours to correct violations or face $1,000 day fines. I almost laughed. Noise complaints? I hadn't hosted a party in years. Lawn aesthetics. I lived on gravel and pine needles. This was Corinne twisting her bylaws into weapons, desperate to reassert control after last night's humiliation. But what made my smile fade was the last line, typed neatly at the bottom. Failure to comply may result in legal action, including property lien. Corinne had escalated from fake cops to financial warfare overnight. By noon, I drove down to the HOA office, a small brick building near the gated entrance. My badge and training told me to go through proper channels before retaliation, collect evidence, document threats, build a case. The receptionist looked up nervously as I entered. Corinne's presence was unmistakable even before I saw her. Her perfume carried down the hall, sharp and floral-like. She'd sprayed half a bottle to mask the stench of guilt. She emerged from her office with her clipboard clutched tight, chin high, but her eyes flickered when she saw me. "Well," she said with a tight smile, "if it isn't our neighborhood Marshal." "Corinne," I nodded slowly. "You sent 3 men with fake badges to my home last night. They're in county custody. You want to explain that before I take this hire?" Her smile froze. "Those men were contractors. Clearly they overstepped. But your truck violates section 4.2, and as HOA president, I have authority to enforce community standards. If you don't like it, perhaps this isn't the right neighborhood for you. I stepped closer, voice low enough only she could hear. You're in deeper than you realize. Impersonating police isn't just overstepping, it's a felony. Keep pushing and you won't just lose your presidency. You'll lose your freedom. For a moment her mask cracked. Fear flickered across her features, then hardened into defiance. We'll see who loses what, she hissed, then turned sharply back into her office. That afternoon, the retaliation began. By 3 o'clock, 2 tow trucks prowled down my street, circling like vultures. They idled outside my driveway, then drove off when I stepped outside with my phone raised. The message was clear. They'd be back. At 4, my internet service cut out. I called the provider, who told me the HOA had reported a relocation request. Karen was trying to choke me off from communication. At 6, I caught a neighbor, Bill, from 3 houses down, standing by my fence with his phone up, snapping pictures of my lawn. He muttered something about documenting violations before scurrying off. Karen was mobilizing the neighborhood like pawns on her chessboard. But pawns don't stand long when a queen overreaches. That night, I laid out my countermeasures. First, I documented everything, screenshots, photos, recordings. My years as a marshal had taught me the value of airtight evidence. Courts didn't care about feelings, they cared about facts. Second, I reached out to Sheriff Havorson again. He sounded weary on the phone. Marshal, I'm not surprised, he admitted. Karen's been running this HOA like a fiefdom for years, but fake cops, that's a first. My hands are tied until those men formally name her in deposition. They already did, I said flatly. One confessed on my porch, your deputies heard it. Verbal isn't enough, we'll need written statements. Until then, Karen's got her lawyers and you've got, well, you. He wasn't wrong. Karen had deep pockets, an army of community enablers, and a willingness to abuse every bylaw in the book. But she underestimated what it meant to be me. I wasn't just a man with a truck and a badge. I was someone trained to dismantle criminal organizations, no matter how polished their fronts looked. And Karen's HOA, that was her little empire. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived. HOA Legal Counsel. The language was sharp. You are hereby fined $7,000 for continued violations. Failure to remit payment within 10 business days will authorize HOA to place lien on property. I read it twice, then set it down on the table. My pulse stayed steady, but a fire lit behind my ribs. Karen wasn't just bluffing, she was moving to take my home. I knew what came next. If she could push me into default, the HOA could seize my cabin, auction it, erase me from the community like I never existed. She wanted to break me, to show every neighbor that even a U.S. Marshal couldn't stand against her rules. But Karen had made a mistake. She thought this was a game of fines and forms. She didn't know she had crossed into federal territory the second she weaponized fake law enforcement against me. And I was done playing nice. That evening, I drove my Chevy into town and parked outside the courthouse annex. I knew the assistant U.S. attorney who worked late on Thursdays. He owed me a favor from a fugitive case years back. We sat in his cramped office, stacks of folders tilting like towers around us. I laid out the evidence, the fake cops, the confession, the escalating retaliation. He leaned back in his chair, whistling low. Marshal, you've got impersonation, conspiracy, attempted theft. If you can tie Karen directly to those men, we've got a case. But you'll need more than hearsay. I'll get it, I said simply. And I meant it. Because Karen had crossed the line from petty HOA president to criminal conspirator. And I was going to be the one to draw the final line. That night, as I drove back up the mountain, I passed Karen's house. Her windows glowed warm, and I could see her silhouette moving from room to room. Clipboard in hand, robe flowing, the queen surveying her kingdom. But her kingdom was built on paper walls, and I was already setting fire to the first sheet. I parked my Chevy in the driveway, locked it tight, and sat on the porch with my badge resting in my hand. The crickets sang, the wind whispered through the pines, and I knew. This wasn't just about defending a truck anymore. This was about defending every inch of ground Karen thought she owned. And I wasn't about to lose. By the third morning, the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. The fake cop incident had become the talk of every cul-de-sac, every white picket fence, every neatly trimmed hedge. Some neighbors whispered sympathy. Others looked at me with suspicion, caught between loyalty to Karen's authority and the reality that the HOA president had crossed every line. But Karen, she was unrelenting. I woke to the distant rumble of engines. Groaning, I pulled back the curtain and froze. 4 massive tow trucks idled in front of my cabin, blocking the road. Behind them, a minivan carried what I guessed were witnesses. Neighbors Karen had recruited to watch my every move. They weren't smiling. They were armed with cameras, clipboards, and a quiet intensity that spoke volumes about their assignment. I poured coffee, never taking my eyes off the driveway. My Chevy sat undisturbed, the faint scratches from 2 nights ago a reminder that Karen hadn't learned anything from failure. A knock at the door jolted me. I opened it cautiously to see one of her so-called witnesses standing there, a middle-aged woman holding a clipboard, trembling slightly. "Sir," she said, voice shaking, "HOA Karen says we're here to enforce the fines. We need access to your property." I held up my badge silently. She froze. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "you are trespassing. If you come any closer, step back." Her eyes went wide. "I am just following orders." "That's exactly what the fake cops said," I muttered, shutting the door gently. Karen's next move was bold and predictable. By noon, she had organized what she called a community intervention. 10 neighbors gathered near my driveway, armed with cameras, tablets, and clipboards. Their mission: photograph, document, and shame me into submission. Karen stepped out from behind the minivan, clipboard in hand, hair perfectly coiffed despite the chaos. "This ends today," she announced, voice carrying down the street. "You will either comply with the HOA or face the consequences of your continued violations." I walked outside, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. My Chevy gleamed in the midday sun. Mud caked its tires. A few scratches marked its body, and it was mine. "You see," I began, voice calm but firm, "my vehicle has been here for years. It complies with every law of the state. And unlike some of you, I don't impersonate law enforcement to get my way." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's face tightened. She hadn't expected public dissent. "Marshal," she snapped, "your tone is unacceptable. I demand you remove your vehicle or pay your fines immediately." "I'll do neither," I said. "But here's what I will do. I will continue documenting every violation you commit as HOA president, every overreach, every attempt to harass me. You want to play dirty? I've spent 20 years dealing with people who play dirty. You're just one level above a speed bump." The crowd shifted. Some exchanged uneasy glances. Others whispered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Karen's next move shocked me. She pulled out a small device from her purse, a remote for the security cameras she had installed throughout the community. "I have footage of your driveway," she said. "We'll use it as evidence against you. You can't hide your violations here." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Footage of my driveway? From which angle, Karen? The one that shows the night you tried to steal my truck with imposters." Her hand trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I had struck a nerve. By late afternoon, Karen escalated even further. She called a private security firm, a group she assumed could intimidate me physically. 4 men in black tactical gear arrived, flashlights and radios at the ready. They didn't know about the badge tucked in my pocket, the Glock on my hip, or the tactical awareness drilled into me for decades. They circled the driveway cautiously, whispering into radios. I walked outside, holding a clipboard of my own. "You know," I said casually, "I've had people like you try to strong-arm me before. Never works out well." One of the men stepped forward, hand raised. "Sir, we are here on HOA business. Please step aside." "Sure," I said. "Step aside from what? From enforcing a law that doesn't exist." Before anyone could react, I tapped my badge against the clipboard. United States Marshal. The effect was instantaneous. They froze, eyes widening as the gravity of their misstep hit them. "You are trespassing, impersonating authority, and potentially committing assault if you advance," I said, calm but deadly serious. "Leave, or you will be taken into federal custody." They scrambled back, muttering excuses. I watched until their van disappeared down the road. That evening I sat on the porch, tired but focused. The neighborhood was quiet again, but the war had only begun. Karen had shown her hand. She would escalate at every opportunity, but now the stakes had changed. I pulled out my laptop and started building a dossier. HOA bylaws and enforcement patterns. All correspondence from Karen. statements from neighbors who had witnessed events, screenshots and photos from the driveway sea. By the time the sun dipped behind the mountains, I had enough to build a legal and federal case that would make Karen regret every move she had made. And yet there was more to come. Karen wasn't just petty, she was vindictive. She wouldn't stop until she had a public victory over me, no matter how small. That meant I had to be ready for anything. I glanced at my Chevy, parked proudly in the driveway. Mud splattered, dented in places, but standing tall. A symbol not just of possession, but of resilience. The siege had ended for the day, but the battle was far from over. And I had a plan. Because in every war, the best victories come from patience, preparation, and timing. Karen had lit the fuse, and I was about to blow the firework. By the fourth morning, the mountain air carried a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. Word had spread. Something was happening at my cabin, and everyone in the HOA was watching. Karen, perched in her little brick office with the clipboard and her perfectly polished hair, believed she was still the queen of the community. But she hadn't accounted for one thing. I didn't play by neighborhood rules. I played by the law, and 20 years as a U.S. Marshal had taught me exactly how to use it. The first step was legal containment. I had compiled everything: emails, photos, videos, statements from neighbors, and even the confession of the fake cops, and delivered a formal complaint to the sheriff's department and county DA. I made it clear: impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy, and intimidation had occurred. The moment I filed it, Karen was officially under federal scrutiny. Next, I turned to the HOA's own bylaws. Every rule she had twisted against me had a loophole, and I exploited each one. For starters, I requested every formal notice she had sent in writing with certified delivery proof. Many of her fines were invalid because she had failed to follow proper procedures. One by one, I began filing countersuits: illegal fines, harassment, attempted intimidation. Every move she had made to pressure me into paying she had documented, but badly. She had left holes in her own legal armor. By mid-morning, I sent out an official HOA-wide email, CCing the HOA board, detailing the fake cop incident, the intimidation tactics, and the ongoing federal investigation. Neighbors opened their inboxes with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Some were outraged on my behalf. Others looked at Karen with eyes that questioned her judgment for the first time. For the first time, her authority looked fragile. Karen didn't take it quietly. Within hours, she had arranged an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. Chairs were lined in neat rows, her board members flanking her like guards. I arrived late, parking the Chevy so that its polished steel glinted in the sunlight, another subtle reminder of the truck she had tried to take. The room buzzed with whispers. Karen stood, clipboard in hand, projecting the same icy composure she always carried. "Neighbors," she began, "I'm sure you've all heard rumors about recent events. These accusations against me and the HOA are unfounded. This is harassment, plain and simple." I leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching her carefully. Every sentence she spoke, every gesture was recorded discreetly on my phone, future evidence. "Let be clear," I said finally, stepping forward. "This is not rumor, this is fact." I outlined the fake cop incident, the trespassing, the intimidation. Names, dates, and times. I showed the photos of the imposters, their IDs, and even the tow truck staged outside my driveway. Gasps filled the room. Karen's board members exchanged worried glances. A few neighbors murmured, clearly impressed. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. You're trying to turn everyone against me," she hissed. "No, Karen," I said calmly. "I'm showing the community what happens when someone abuses power. I'm showing them that laws exist to protect us, even when petty officials try to bend them for personal gain." The room went silent. Even Karen's most loyal supporters hesitated. By evening, I executed the next phase of my plan: social pressure. I invited neutral neighbors to my cabin under the guise of a casual community barbecue: food, music, friendly conversation. Karen and her allies couldn't ignore it. Cameras, whispers, and word of mouth worked faster than legal papers sometimes. As people arrived, I casually brought up the HOA's overreach. The fake cops, the fines, the intimidation. Neighbors who had been quietly watching Karen's antics suddenly realized she had escalated far beyond a petty dispute. A few even admitted to being quietly relieved someone finally held her accountable. Meanwhile, Karen tried her own counter, sending texts and calling board members to insist they avoid my gathering. But it was too late. Her influence had started to crack, and I was solidifying mine, quietly but effectively. The final move that evening was personal. I placed a new security system around the cabin, not for show, but for leverage. Every entry point, every vehicle approach, every visitor was recorded in real time and backed up securely. Karen had tried intimidation in darkness. I was making sure the light was now on her, metaphorically and literally. As the sun set behind the mountains, the Chevy sat proudly in the driveway, headlights reflecting off the glassy lake. The cabin, once under siege, now looked untouchable. Every camera, every neighbor aware of the facts, every legal step I had taken built a fortress that Karen couldn't break with petty tactics. That night I stood on the porch, surveying my property. The crickets chirped, the wind whispered through the pines, and the moonlight shimmered across the Chevy's hood. Karen had made the mistake of underestimating me. She thought she could manipulate fear and authority to bend me to her will. But she had underestimated patience, preparation, and the long reach of federal authority. She had escalated to the point where there was no turning back, and I was ready. Tomorrow, I would push the final moves that would ensure Karen's reign of terror over the community ended. And she would finally understand that trying to take my truck, my home, or my dignity was a mistake she couldn't survive. Because the law wasn't on her side. It was on mine. Dawn broke over the mountains with an almost ceremonial brightness, as if the universe itself was signaling that today would end something long overdue. The Chevy gleamed in the driveway, untouched, proud, defiant. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the calm before the storm. Karen, however, was not calm. I knew it. By now, word of my legal filings, the HOA-wide emails, and the social exposure of her schemes had reached her ears. She had no allies left willing to publicly support her. The board members who once nodded along to her whims now hesitated, their loyalties split. But she was desperate, and desperation is dangerous. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered cautiously. "Marshal," Karen's voice hissed. "You think you've won. You think you can humiliate me in front of the community and get away with it." "I don't think," I said evenly. "I know, the federal case is solid. Your HOA manipulations are documented. The community is aware. What exactly do you hope to gain by calling me at 10 a.m.? "You'll see," she snapped, then hung up. Minutes later, headlights appeared down the winding road. Not her usual minivan or security trucks. This time, she had escalated with a rented flatbed and a tow crew determined to remove the Chevy once and for all. They didn't know about the badge, the Glock, or the federal case. They just thought intimidation would work. I walked outside slowly, hands in pockets, keeping my eyes on the approaching vehicles. "Morning," I called cheerfully. "Beautiful day for a truck, isn't it?" The lead driver, a young man with a baseball cap pulled low, hesitated. He scanned the driveway and froze at the sight of the Chevy and the calm determination behind my eyes. "You know," I said softly, tapping the badge on my belt, "trespassing with intent to steal federal property is a serious crime. That includes impersonation, intimidation, and, well, attempted theft." The words seemed to hit harder than any rifle shot. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Karen herself appeared then, sprinting down the driveway, clipboard waving like a weapon. "Marshal, stop them. You'll ruin the community. You'll destroy everything." I shook my head. "Karen, the only thing destroyed here is your credibility. Your threats, your intimidation, your fake cops, everything is documented. I've notified the sheriff, the DA, and your HOA board. Every action you take now is evidence against you." Her face twisted in rage. "You'll pay for this, I'll—" "Karen," I interrupted, voice cold now, carrying authority only a marshal could project. "The only payment you'll make is the one due to justice, and it's coming." At that moment, I walked toward the Chevy, the sun glinting off its chrome. One of the tow crew men tried to step forward. Mistake. With calm precision, I reached for my Glock, not drawing it, just letting its presence speak. The men froze. I flipped the badge out and displayed it openly. "I suggest you leave," I said. "Now." The sound of hesitation, muttered curses, and radio chatter filled the air. They all knew they were outmatched, not by brute force, but by authority and law. Slowly, almost reluctantly, they backed the trucks down the driveway and turned their engines off. Karen's fury erupted. She stomped toward me, pointing a finger. This isn't over. It is, I said finally. For you, Karen, it is over. The final step was administrative, but no less satisfying. I filed the official federal complaint detailing the fake cop scheme, harassment, and conspiracy. Every HOA fine she had levied against me was challenged and invalidated. I requested a federal review of the HOA's enforcement methods, citing Karen's personal vendetta as evidence of systemic abuse. By evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting without Karen. They removed her from the presidency, citing abuse of authority, legal liability, and repeated harassment of a resident. The community had finally turned, recognizing her manipulations and threats. I watched from my porch, sipping a celebratory whiskey. The Chevy gleamed in the twilight, a symbol of resilience and justice. Neighbors waved, some approaching to offer apologies or words of admiration. The balance had shifted. Karen's empire of fear had crumbled overnight. 2 weeks later, Karen faced formal charges for impersonating law enforcement and conspiracy to commit theft. The fake cops' testimonies were irrefutable. She lost her HOA position permanently, her credibility destroyed, and the fines she attempted to levy against me were fully refunded, with legal fees covered. I stood once more on the porch looking at the Chevy. It had survived the siege, the intimidation, and Karen's relentless schemes. More than a truck, it was a testament to patience, planning, and knowing your own power. The mountains were calm again, the wind gentle through the pines. The crickets sang their evening song. Justice had been served, not with violence, but with evidence, preparation, and authority. Karen would talk, she would stew, and she would regret ever underestimating me. And I could finally enjoy the peace I had sought when I first bought this cabin. Because in this community, on this mountain, the lesson was clear. No one, not even an HOA queen like Karen, could outplay a U.S. Marshal. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one, the truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.